You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Adler and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is finally episode 614, where we're going to continue our Andor coverage. We took a little break there for the summer, but we're back to finish up the Andor coverage that we started. We're doing spotlights on characters primarily, but tonight we're actually going to visit the Rebellion and the Empire. So taking a look at both of those and some of the more ancillary, I'm going to call them ancillary characters that were in both the Empire and Rebellion. And should be a lot of fun to talk about this and hopefully remember my show notes because I don't have them. But with me tonight to help all that out is Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight? I'm oversharing tonight, by the way.
You're oversharing. Wow.
I'm oversharing. Yes.
This is going to be a lot of fun then.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be back, man. It's been a while since we've been able to do a public show. So it's been almost exactly a month, if you can believe that.
Uh-huh.
So really excited. We've got people chomping a bit out in the live stream chat already. So super exciting to be here tonight. And again, we took it to talk more Andor, and it's a celebratory season for Andor. So let's keep it going.
Yeah. And while we're on that just quickly topic, we've still got Bix and Cassie and Andor still coming up ahead of us. So that should be a lot of fun to get into those two as well. But before we do go any further, how about some shout outs and thank yous to some very special people?
Yeah, thanks to all of our amazing Patreon members. We certainly appreciate all your continued support. CantinaCast.com/Patreon. If you are curious about any of our content that we have there, we have live video packages. We have audio only. Anything that you would like to contribute to the show and get bonus content, we hope you would enjoy that. Special thanks to our now part of the tribe members, Alex, Danny, Dante, Daz, I've got a Brad feeling, Jackson, Jacob, Josh, Mike, Risk, Sharkman, Dan, and Uncle Leon. And then our Delusion Trainer members are top tier. Now, this is Rod Racing, CJ, Steve, and Rob. Again, CantinaCast.com/Patreon. If you are curious about Patreon, we'd love to have you as part of our community.
Yep. We got some folks in the live stream tonight.
We do. CantinaCast.com/YouTube. If you're listening to this, thank you for the download. We'd love to have you come out and join some of these amazing folks so far. Skywalker's Academy, Stephanie, Music Train, Alex, Zerallen's lurking in the background. We love it when she does that. One Up versus CPU. We see you folks out there in the background as well. We see you lurking as well. So come out, say hello. We'd love to get your thoughts as we go through. This is going to be kind of an episode that moves us around a bit as we talk about Rebellion and Empire and these different characters. We're going to float in and out of a lot of stuff, I would imagine, especially with you without a show note. So this is going to be pretty fun. So yeah, please come out and say and share some of your thoughts around the show as well. We'd love to put them up on screen.
I'm just trying to keep it real around here. And by real, I mean on the fly and off the cuff. So also programming notes, the Jedi Novel Archive show that Lauren does she just released the full review of Sanctuary. This is the Bad Batch book by Lamar Giles, and I'm only about halfway through that book, and it's actually really good. Like I'm not going to go, it's like amazing, but it's been a fun read. Like it's similar to what we said with the comic books. It was just nice to be able to catch up with them and feel like those characters were being portrayed as they were in the show, just now in book format. We get a lot more discussion and just banter and dialogue and all that stuff. So a great little read there. But if you haven't, she's got a spoiler-free review out as well that came out, I think, last week. But the full review is out today. So please go check out that. Give her a like. And if you're not already subscribed to the Cantina Cast, please do so on YouTube so that you can be alerted every time she starts putting more book reviews out there. So good job, Lauren. Let's see. Sunday, we've got a Patreon show. So that's coming up. We're back onto a regular schedule, sort of, because the other thing I wanted to mention is starting next Tuesday, we're going to go to 5 shows a week. No, I'm kidding. Starting next Tuesday, look at Jonesy's blood pressure shot up there. Man. Starting next Tuesday, we're going to shift from Wednesday night midweek shows to Tuesday night midweek shows. And that's just to kind of accommodate.
Keep you on your toes is what it's doing.
No, I mean, we usually have these kind of framed around, whatever TV show is out. So we can kind of hit that nice and early, but we don't kind of in this dull period. And quite honestly, with kids going back to school and all that, it's going to be a better night for us. So Tuesday night will be a midweek show, and we'll still come back and do Patreon for you guys on Sunday. So mark your calendars, August 12th. That'll be the first Tuesday show, and we'll be on there every Tuesday after that. Yeah,
and that's looking like it's going to shape up to be a Bix episode, right?
Yeah. So yeah, good point. Yeah, we'll be talking about Bix. So, man, a lot to talk to. I think there's so much to talk about not even with the character, but the actress too. And I know we've kind of spilled some of that already on the main shows, but
Yeah, you bait and switched Skywalker's Academy there. He was all in on 5 days a week, so he was excited. So now you pulled the rug out from under.
Well, and I noticed there was a spike suddenly in Patreon members, and they all just dropped immediately too. So I guess goes without saying. All right, well let's do this. Let's talk about the rebellion and the Empire. I kind of want to start with just maybe a general question that will kind of carry through both of these, but let's start with the rebellion. Because I don't want to short the rebellion in this series, but I feel like with the rebellion, we just had so much more to kind of go off of already. And a lot of what we got in the show wasn't bad at all. Very eye-opening. It was really nice to get a lot of insight and finally see a lot of things happen that we'd heard about, or how things worked, or some of the relationships that were there. All that was great. But it really was the Empire, I think, that kind of stole the show, at least for this show as far as the topic goes, because that was more revealing in terms of finally pulling back the proverbial curtain and really trying to get to see the evil empire that exists more than just the big floating ball that blows up planets. So maybe let's start with the rebellion. How did what was there anything that you learned about the rebellion in this series that you didn't have already going into either season 1 or season 2? And then maybe the follow-up is just like, what were some of the highlight and standout moments for you from the rebellion perspective?
Yeah, I kind of thought, I had a similar thought. I was thinking about this earlier about, and what was really different about the rebellion that we didn't know? We knew about the conflict with Saw Gerrera. We knew some of that. So I was talking with Hard Countered, actually. Him and I were hanging out a little bit earlier, and I posted to him, and he had a lot of nuance to it as well. And I won't presume to summarize what he had, but what I really enjoyed about it was there was a lot of nuance that goes in, that kind of go into the rebellion of what we learned from it. And I think one of the things that we had talked about was kind of that deeper insight that we had about the differences between Saw and Luthen, and ultimately how it shapes the rebellion, and how, again, keeping Mon Mothma clean, having that aspect of the rebellion be there, but also the dissension between. I think one of the things I was a little surprised about was, and why I'm surprised about it, I don't know, but is that just how the rebellion had to come together so quickly towards the end, even though they had been making a lot of slow progress, through all of that too. I think one thing I was a little surprised about, though, genuinely surprised, was that the show really, season 2 really leaned into the almost terroristic nature of the rebellion in some ways. And and again, I think that made some people uncomfortable, especially for Luthen, who really kind of felt like the godfather of the rebellion in many ways. And they positioned him as such. But I think that made the character all that more interesting. And we talked about this when we talked about him and Clea, but that dynamic between what the rebellion was and what it was birthed as, and the subtle nuanced difference between him and Saw, while they have a lot of similarities between them, they differ greatly in kind of what their end goal is and what their individual kind of personal aspects of that are, and what they want to achieve for the rest of the galaxy, right? And kind of atonement versus revenge and things like that too between the characters. So there's a lot of that subtlety, I think, in there that we see that isn't necessarily new, but I think gives us a lot more depth to dig into if we're willing to spend the time to do it, I think. And I think just him and my conversation, he had a lot of thoughts around that, of just how deep you can kind of go through us. It was really, it opened my eyes of another appreciation, another perspective of looking at how deep we could really go with the rebellion, even though it felt like it was kind of surface level in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have a lot of the same notes. I think that I remember. So Luthen, what I was going to say is I remember I do appreciate the Luthen and Clea kind of angle to this, because it was an element, maybe a degree of the rebellion that we just had no idea existed, and thank God it did. We kind of felt like some of the roles and some of the things that we saw in season 1 and season 2 from Luthen and Clea probably were being done by Bail Organa, maybe being done by Saw Gerrera. And when you really look at it, it kind of makes sense to kind of pull some of those out and create its own other entity that was still working in conjunction, in collaboration with these three, because they're almost, there's times when it makes sense for them to kind of work together, and other times where they don't. So that dynamic of the rebellion, and having somebody kind of be that godfather that started it all, who was really, at one point, at least the intentions were there to kind of coalesce the rebellion. But really, I think somebody like Luthen and Saw Gerrera probably would have been okay, and probably felt better had they just continued on what they were doing in their own little individual silos. It wasn't until Mon Mothma came around that really kind of brought everybody together and said, no, we need to unify. On that note, I did feel like it was interesting to see just how many factions existed prior to this, right? We had, we heard there was kind of pockets of the rebellion, but in my head going into the series, I always thought, okay, there was probably like one big group that were all, buddy, just hadn't really formalized or given it a name just yet. And there were some little ancillary groups out there that were that. But that wasn't at all the case. This really makes more sense that you would have a galaxy littered with pockets of fermenting groups of rebels that were starting to uprise.
Fomenting, not fermenting.
Not fermenting. No, fermenting's a totally different thing. Fomenting. But with that many groups out there, it makes sense because the Empire was so ruthless and they were so widespread in the amount and types of tyranny that they were spreading through the galaxy. That you were going to get groups uprising for all kinds of things, whether it was, economic issues or welfare issues or just humanity issues or, the power that was coming, all that. There were so many different groups. And there was something in I forget now who it was. I think it was, I don't want to talk about the Empire too much right now, but later on when we talk about the Empire, there was a mention at one point when Partagaz had the ISB together and they were talking about how many rebel cells they had infiltrated and how many guns they had taken, right? And it was like 75 new cells that they had just infiltrated in total. Right? That was 75 just in one sector for like, excuse me, like a small portion of time. So there were a lot of these guys out there, excuse me. And so being able to see them just kind of not only getting picked apart by the Empire, but just the sparsity of all of these groups was really interesting to see.
Yeah, the intentional isolation of the Empire to drive wedges and then keep them even just from being always constantly off balance and looking more locally than being able to actually organize, right?
Yeah. Sorry, they're fermented rebels. And then Skywalker's Academy said that. And then one up says they're making rebel alcohol.
Here it goes well with poker.
Yeah. Wasn't Greedo turned into a liquor in Legends?
Your favorite character? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was. I think they took his head or something and they made it they fermented it.
It's getting dark, man. Let's move on.
Go look it up. I didn't write this.
Seriously?
Yeah, I'm totally serious.
Oh, I must have missed that in the Cliff Notes version of Star Wars that I watched.
No, it's the Legends thing. But okay. Anyways, somebody look it up and vindicate me here. So something else that I found interesting was just maybe not interesting, but finally getting to see it and just how impactful it was. And that was Mon Mothma's like resistance within the Senate and how willingly a lot of these senators were able to just switch over. Like we talked about this so many times prior to Andor about how a lot of these, a lot of the senators and just the Senate in general were kind of turning that proverbial blind eye to what was going on. And, we suspected they were getting their pocketbooks lined and giving power and all that sort of stuff. And it was just interesting to see all that happen. It was probably very apparent, especially in season 2, when we open up with that, I forget which episode it was, but the one where she's going around and she's trying to gain support for a couple things. And, she's got some folks in there that you can tell have already checked out. They're not really interested. They're just kind of listening to her. But the lack of support that she was starting to get, right, that grip that the Empire was starting to tighten around her neck and the power of the Senate and the representation of the people was really cool to watch and see on display in those later episodes that we had there with the Senate.
Right.
Let me see what else did I have. And then I guess another interesting aspect, one other one that I was thinking about was the level of secrecy that the rebellion had to have. Like it existed. Again, I think we knew it existed. But later on down the road there, towards the very end, when what was his name? The guy that was General Draven. Was it General Draven?
Yeah.
Just Draven's amount, like I wouldn't call it paranoia, but the idea that as they were continually to get bigger and they were bringing more and more people in, they had to vet these people and they had to put in a lot of controls, exactly, because they just really couldn't trust anyone to just jump in there and do what they, be a part of the rebellion. They couldn't take everybody at face value or at their word. And so there was kind of a vetting process that had to exist because honestly, I mean, when you think about it in the context of them pulling in 75 groups in just let's just call it one day. I don't know, maybe it's a week or whatever. and they shut all those down. I mean, the Empire was reeling these guys in. It's amazing that this rebellion was able to kind of get where it got, and a lot of it had to have come from some of those controls and the secrecy that went around, that was involved with that. Because as the Empire continued to grow, it became more and more difficult for them to operate in secrecy without people leaking or people or spies infiltrating into the ranks. So, I mean, it wasn't really fully on display in the series, but we got bits and pieces of it at least talked about and spoken about in some of the episodes. And a lot of it was coming from Draven and you know, the authority that he was trying to put over Andor for just kind of deciding to take off without any authorization and then coming into land without any authorization. Right? You could have been anybody. We could have shot you down had we not known. So
that's a good point, because when you watch shows like Rebels and Mon Mothma gives her speech and then everybody shows up, right? It's a uplifting moment. We get excited. Everything's coming together. But like to your point, where did they actually come from? And we gloss over some of that too, right? Animation or, you know, kind of a kid show and things like that. But in this show, we have to ground it a little bit more too, and show that realistic nature that no, there could be threats within our own ranks as well. And I think we even saw that with Saw Gerrera's group, right? Where he had the person who was infiltrating, they shot him. So you have some of that you have to be cognizant of, you have to be a little bit careful of.
Yeah.
And you're at a really critical moment, I think, in this stage, especially towards the end of the season, of course, because we know what's coming next, but they also kind of feel it too. You're at that tipping point where, you know, we're on the cusp of being able to do something here and truly do something organized and big, but we don't know if we're quite ready, and everything feels like it's about to fall apart. So you have to tighten your belt a little bit with some of that, but you have to be careful not to tighten too much that you start, you know, everything starts slipping through your fingers, so to speak.
There is one other thing too, and I think I'll talk about this more when we get to the Empire, but just the appreciation for what the rebellion had to go through, right? Everything seems so much sweeter now. And what I mean by that is like the Death Star blowing up and the big celebration at the end of Return of the Jedi. All of that has so much more weight, and you really understand what the rebellion was going through. I mean, again, we already knew that because there's been a lot of it done, whether it was Rebels or some of the books, and even in Legends, there was a lot of stuff that kind of really dove into, you know, the oppression that the Empire was throwing on the galaxy at large. But this series really does help kind of amplify the appreciation for those moments, those victory moments, and I'll come back to that in a little bit because I kind of want to talk about where that stems from. But let's get into like just some of the rebellion characters, and we're not going to talk about all of them. I decided we just pick a few of them that were kind of more of the standouts, or kind of went through some level of transformation rather than just everybody. So why don't we start? And this one is probably, you could argue that this is not one, but it's a major character. This is Bail Organa. You know, of course, we had a literal transformation, a physical transformation from the actors with this character. But what stood out for you? Anything that was different in lighting, things you liked, didn't like about Bail Organa here?
What was a little bit different, I think, is I think what we got used to with Bail Organa was very much the caring, charismatic person, right? That was leading and is very front and center. We now in towards the end of season 2 here, we see someone who is a bit more reserved. He's trying to enact a discipline, I think, within this rebellion and get people to think and operate in a way that's, you know, very structured. And that's something a little bit different than we've seen from Bail Organa in many ways, especially if you're reading some of the books and how he is at, you know, end of Revenge of the Sith, getting into a post-Order 66 and the Rise of the Empire era, you know, where he's a little bit, you know, flying off, you know, just kind of off the cuff, right? And being a little bit careless in some ways. The charisma and everything is still there. I think we see some of that in Andor as well, but, you know, we didn't see this hardcore discipline that we see like we had in the season of the show. Mm-hmm. So I think that was one of the more standout type of moments or differences of opinion of what we have. And it's always a little uncomfortable when we see our longstanding characters like a Bail Organa then having conflict with a Cassian Andor. Right?
Yeah,
right. We see two characters pulling in the same direction for the most part, at least, you know, final intentions, but how they go about it is different. And you have that tension there that just feels a little uncomfortable because we know both characters are generally, you know, pretty good at heart and should be working together, but can't seem to find a way to because of conflicting smaller interests or more localized interests, maybe a better way of putting it. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a side of Bail Organa we hadn't seen before. And I thought that was interesting that come about in some ways in order to articulate the differences of how Bail Organa has to change given this era
Yep.
too, based on what we even read like in Reign of the Empire, right? Where he's just kind of out there trying to vindicate the Jedi and just doing whatever he thinks is needed to be done. Kind of everything else, not caring about the consequences so much. Here we see him very concerned about the consequences about every little action, because again, we're at that tipping point. So
Rightfully so. Yep.
yeah, absolutely.
No, I had the same thing. Like, because I mean, his character for the most part seems like a natural extension, and I know there were some folks that were upset that this wasn't the caring, loving father, Jimmy Smith smiling character that we got from the prequels. But if you think about it, really didn't have a lot of his character post, at least post Andor, right? So I mean, this beyond this, we don't really have much of anything. We don't ever see him again. So so it makes sense that he would be there, especially given, like you said, the circumstances. This is the proverbial tipping point here. They're under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. The ominous something is coming. They don't even know what that is, right? Doom is coming. So yeah, he's going to be changed in some ways, and he's not going to be as loving and supporting, or that part of it. There's a good right place and right time for everything, and that really probably wasn't the right time, especially for somebody like Cassian Andor, who he's got a past, and he was aligned with Luthen at one point, and it goes back to what we said earlier. They can't just be buddy with everybody that comes in. Everyone needs to be held accountable. The stakes are much higher, and so that level of the expectations need to be higher for everyone around them. So I think that makes sense. It was a natural extension. I think Saw Gerrera, and I threw him in here as a rebel because he is, even though he's a nutcase, right? He's still against the Empire for what they stand for and everything that they're doing, for probably personal and selfish reasons, of course. But still, I love the take. I mean, that's one of those characters when you think about his performance. I guess his character in the Clone Wars, right? I mean, we are 180 degrees on the other end of that. I mean, it's an absolute about face in terms of his character, and so he's got a history there where you can actually see the natural progression, or I don't know, dissension of his character and his mentality and just his mental fitness and all that. I mean, there's just a big change that happens with him. But even though we see that over a long timeline, just from season 1 to season 2, and yes, I know we skipped, it's still 5 years that we kind of skipped ahead in there, but there is definitely a change there. I mean, we saw it in the way the performance was given by Forrest Whitaker. He seemed much more lucid and maybe normal in season 1. But then fast forward 5 years and what war has brought to him, and the physical turmoil and the mental turmoil that's brought him, the paranoia that's sunk in, the schizophrenia that has probably sunk in, all of that stuff was on display by the time we got to him, snorting gas and laughing it off, right? I mean, it's just a kind of a crazy character that's out there. And so it just makes sense now when you see him, when we get to, what's the name of the movie?
Rogue One.
I'm getting old. When we get to Rogue One and we see that character, you can look back and say, wow, there was a natural progression there. I mean, he absolutely did change. And that's why he was, ostracated and pushed aside from, left out of the big kids table on a lot of these sessions. And they were really timid around him because they weren't really sure what to do with him, because he was starting to become a loose cannon and starting to really, fall off the old rocker there.
Yeah. And some characters are important to have that steady, like, the path that they're going, and it's inevitable. I think that's what Saw Gerrera, like, was his path surprising in any kind of way? No, not really. It basically happened more or less like we would have drawn it up. I mean, the specifics and everything, and the snort and the Rido and stuff is a little bit, out there. But aside from that, generally, like you said, his regression or just dissension into madness and paranoia and all the other things was somewhat preordained in many ways. And a lot of that started back in the Clone Wars, so that he was on that constant progression, but that consistency. I like with the character of saying that this is where we knew he was going to end up, and we just kind of keep chipping away at it and keep showing these moments. I think maybe the one disappointing part is we didn't really get to spend a lot of time, and we really have no content, or very little content, across any of the medium of really kind of diving into Saw Gerrera's way of thinking, right? I think even with Reign of Empire, it's always an external perspective on it. Maybe some of the pre-Rogue One novels.
Yeah, Rebel Rising had some of it, but it was still through the lens of like Jyn Erso.
It's always through somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not complaining about that. And we do get glimpses of who Saw is and kind of what matters to him. And you know that there is good in him, so to speak, right? But he just can't get out of his own way about how he believes it should be. And it's just outright chaos. And he just wants to disrupt, I think. The hard counter, we're talking about this too. I think disruption was the word he kind of came up with. And, disruption was the name of the game. And that's just kind of what he keeps doing. And it's almost this contrarian nature by default of how he wants to operate. And I think towards the end, like you were saying, everything is setting him off and he can't believe anything. Like you think you know something, but you don't, even though they clearly do know something about where he is. And
you have no idea where I'm
outright, at. Just outright denying it and kind of lying about it because he just doesn't want to give in, right? But it's important to see that his arc is pretty linearly downward, right?
Yeah, right.
Of where he was going. There was no kind of peak and valley, or for the most part, or moment of realization or any of the dynamic stuff we'll talk about with some of the characters coming up here, where you can see where they had some of those peaks and valleys and moments of decision and moments where they had to take control and choose. When for Saw, he made the choice a long time ago and just kept making the same one over and over. So a very clear path forward.
Yeah. If you've ever worked and done anything where you're trying to bring order to something, the last thing you want is to have like an agent of chaos, right? In your mix, a Captain Chaos, if you will. And that's exactly what it is, because they tend to become a liability, right? You've got to be worrying about the bad guy or whatever it is you're trying to, fight against. But then you got this quote ally who's just as wild, just as, like you said, chaotic or disorderly or whatever it is. And so you have to account for that. And that's just another level of responsibility nobody wants to take on when you're just trying to, set the pillars in place for something that's more organized and tight and secure and trusting and all that. It's just not a good mix. And so it only makes sense that they would have continued to push him out the way they did.
Yeah. And it's always a similar arc, right? They're useful for a time, right?
Correct.
And you kind of justify them behaving the way they are, and it's an acceptable path and it's acceptable behavior until it's not.
Yeah.
Right. And that seems like they get to that breaking point around this 2 or 3 year mark in particular, where everything has fallen apart, maybe closer to 5 years before Rogue One. But it was somewhere in that neighborhood, things really start to degrade to where the trust and the relationship isn't there. Maybe trust was always a fragile thing to begin with, and that's probably the case. But at the same time, it eroded so much that there's just no reliability there. And there's no predictability, and that's really hard whenever you're trying to build something.
Yeah.
And you have someone who just doesn't want to build; they just want to tear down.
Mm-hmm. Before we get to Wilmon Pock, I do one up came through for us here. He says after Greedo's death, Whir and his new droid companion C2R4 claimed the bounty hunter's body and ground it up into a powerful liqueur.
Gross.
All that remained of Greedo afterwards was his head.
Even grosser, and probably his fingers for you.
It's just a head and like little suction cup fingers. Oh, yeah. Those things are gross. All right, thanks. See, Yo isn't crazy.
Someone banned one up versus CPU.
Yeah, he's getting put into timeout.
Yeah, he's got to be put in timeout.
Let's talk about Wilmon Pock, because this is a character that we kind of called it out. Like during season 1, we were very interested to see what was going to happen with him, just because he was so young and being put in the midst of everything that was happening and what happened on Ferrix, and we suspected that he was going to become kind of radicalized. And he's a character that it's probably not too far to say that he was, but I think at some point it looked like he flared up because he was all in with Saw Gerrera there for a while and snorting gas and stuff. And then by the time we got to like the third, like 2 BBY or 1 BBY, he was back to normal again, right? He just kind of regressed. And so there was probably an arc there, where he probably went too far, saw too much, realized that, whoa, I'm hanging out with the devil kind of thing, or at least the devil's best friend, and decided to come back to Earth or come back to the group. And because that was the sense I was picking up, but we didn't get all that. But nonetheless, I would say that his character definitely went through a lot of change. We got to see him at one point with his relationship that he was trying to foster there, and which was successful. I think we got that in the end credit scene. We got to see him sitting down with his girl there, and everything was going well. So it is an interesting character. We didn't get a whole lot from him, but it is interesting to see someone who is very malleable in that way. someone who you can, manipulate or inspire. And he definitely was under the influence of a lot of different people. He's a character that I'd love to see later on. Like, it feels like he's been through so much and he's seen so much and he's been under so many different types of, like, I would call it leadership styles within the rebellion, that it makes sense that by the time we get to, episode 4 and the fight against the Galactic Empire as the true rebellion, seems like he probably he would have had a pretty big role, right? And so there's probably some stories there that could be told, and it would be stories that I'd be interested in seeing, just because we got to see the birth and the origin of that character.
I think one of the things I like about Wilmot and his arc was it was dynamic, I think, to your point, where a lot of influences, a lot of people trying to kind of fight for his soul in some ways, while he's also struggling to figure out what is his path. I mean, what happened on Ferrix, and he kind of lit the match on some of what was going on there too, right? Mm-hmm. But then also the sense of family and the sense of belonging on Ferrix, and then when we start season 2 and he's with Brasso and with Bix, and you have that family aspect, building a relationship. Is there a future? There's hope. And I think we're always centering on hope, I think, with Star Wars and this era in particular, because it's such a bleak time of when individual characters can go and try to find it. And when they do find it, often it's ripped away from them. But, for him to, kind of find it and then find it again and resist some of these situations that he's put in and get wrapped up into it, that's the inexperience, and that's the growth of youth, right? That you kind of endure and you go through. But at the end of the day, his heart was always still there. And I think the moments between him and Cassian, I think, are probably some of the most memorable for me. When they remember Ferrix and they embrace and they share there's really, I think, 2 moments that they had. One was after Luthen died, and another, I forgot what the exact scenario was, but it was just those moments. Those are the ones that leave a lasting impression on you about, this is the heart of what it means to fight for what you believe in and fight what we have, but also, sacrificing a little bit of his relationships too, and what's important, and where do you prioritize your family versus your spouse in some ways, or your significant other, and the conflicts that you have between taking care of your new family and your traditional family, right, or your historical family, when they're not completely integrated. And especially in these really tough, difficult times that are probably constantly changing for him and for the people around him. So, but those are, the character, a little, I think we would have loved to have a little bit more of some of that too. But I think what we did get was kind of deep enough to where we get an appreciation for the character, and he's kind of interesting enough to be able to say that they're, equating the trials of youth a little bit with, and you can see his growth. I think it's something we're always looking for in a series. And I think with Wilmot, we definitely get aspects of that and elements of that throughout all of this, of how he fits in with these different situations that he's in, the injuries he has, but also not caving into injuries and becoming, basically like an invalid or anything like that, or just being uninspired to do anything else, and still wants to serve and still wants to contribute. Yeah. And is listening all the time, right? And he's really responsible for rescuing Clea. I mean, if it wasn't for Wilmot, we wouldn't have got Clea back.
Yeah, I hadn't really considered that, but you're
He's
absolutely
the
right.
only one listening, right?
Yeah.
With contraband.
Yeah.
Right. That's that Ferrix spirit too, right? That a little bit of that defiance, a little bit of that individuality, staying true to yourself. It's really cool to see some of that too.
The last person I had on here was just was Vel Sartha, and I don't know. Why don't you take this one first? Just talking about her development, because she is another character that I feel got shortchanged a little bit, because we had to focus on Andor, the primary characters that we saw in the final 6 episodes. Yeah, very much heavily focused. I mean, she did have a moment there at the very end with Clea, which was nice to see, and we've kind of talked about that when we broke that show down. But she's a character that did go through quite a bit of development, a lot of change, and we just had to kind of put pieces together because we didn't get a whole lot from it.
Yeah, I mean, there was more to it than like a Wilmot, I think, and especially when you see kind of where she was at season 1, and then beginning season 2, the relationship with Cinta kind of falling apart. I think there were a lot, and then where she ended up, we kind of skipped to that part. We didn't see the in between, and maybe that's kind of what the disappointment is a little bit there. We want to be able to see those transitory moments, and what is it that shifts the character from this decision to a different decision, a different path, right? When they have to make a cognizant change of breaking away from Luthen and that lifestyle and buying into something like the rebellion. Like, what was the catalyst? What was what was the breaking point, right? What was that fulcrum of a decision? And we didn't get that, right? And that's the consequence of trying to wrap all of this up in 12 episodes, over a course of like 4 years, right, of season 2. So those are the challenges you kind of get, the trade-offs you have with it. But I think what they did with the character was actually still really good. They got the point across, which I think was fantastic. And I really liked where this character kind of started, the needing for a father figure, the wanting, the distance that Clea would put between them and be the one to physically almost put the arm distance and then remind her of her place, of what she needed and not. But then also to rekindle the relationship that was lost with Mon Mothma, right? In season 1, we remember there was a lot of tension, and even with Lita as well, there was a little bit of tension that involved Mon Mothma there too. And then we see that shifting though, and we see Vel maybe coming around of sorts, whatever that actually means, but rekindling that relationship with Mon Mothma. And I really love that we had those moments early on, and as well as the relationship with Senta and how that the tension we had, but also the underlying the underlying kind of connection that they had, and we were able to at least enjoy it for a moment, even though it was ripped from us, type of thing. And you actually feel like what was important to them, and you're on the cusp of that next step, and it just the environment that they're in is always one of risk, and it falls apart, of course, for them. But she uses it and inspires it to do something different, and then that was probably that key moment, right? That moved her away from Luthen's side of, you can't keep using us like pawns. We're people. We need to start behaving in a different way, because this is not acceptable. But
yeah,
I actually rather enjoyed the Vel character, and I know you did too. But I kind of like where the arc went, even though it was a little shallow at times, when we would have really liked to have dug into it for maybe another episode or something like that. Just a little more time to really get further into it and get a few more details out of it. But overall, pretty satisfied with how this character went. And I like where we ended up, that she's the one, kind of the caretaker for Clea at the end. And then she's able to leverage those experiences and say, look, here's something, there is something here for you. Let me help you find it. Let me be to you what you wouldn't let Luthen be for me. Right. Type of thing. And what she wouldn't do for Vel either, in that distance, and showing that compassion and showing that difference of character, I think, by the end of the day, and her true self finally coming out, not that hardened soul that we were introduced to early on.
Yeah, I think we talked about this when we did the show. I don't know the origin for why, and maybe it's not important, right? Why Vel got into all of this to begin with. I'd love to see
either.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have seen what it was that brought her into this. Maybe it was Cinta. Maybe, she fell in love with Cinta first, and Cinta pulled her in, and, she was fighting the fight because of her. I mean, who knows?
Kind of sounds like it was maybe Luthen collecting wayward souls.
Yeah, and exactly.
Kind of what I always assumed. Yeah.
Right. How did she get wayward? Was it, there was a level, there was another dimension to her character that I was never suspecting that I enjoyed. And that was just this whole kind of like pushing against the old traditions and the old ways, right? That's not who I am. And even though society says that we need to be that way. And both her and Mon Mothma were kind of in that same group. But, maybe there was something there where she was, exiled or whatever from her society originally. And maybe she was allowed to kind of stick around because of the wealth or the prominence that that household name had or something. But there had to have been something there that got her in there, or at least felt that made her feel like, hey, I need to align with somebody like Luthen and even stick around with Luthen as long as she did. I'd love to have seen more of that and kind of understand that. But the other thing she does, I think, at the very end that probably goes unsaid, is she is kind of a grounding post for somebody like Mon Mothma. Mothma's coming into this rebellion that has been out there. She's never really been a part of it. I mean, she's been fighting the good fight, trying to do all the things by the book in the Senate. And suddenly she's now, bunkering in with these people that are actually fighting wars and killing people and doing things that she never thought she was going to have to be. I mean, it's an absolutely totally different world, although it's all same part of that ecosphere. But it's somebody like Vel that is actually there to kind of ground her. It's a familiar face. It's a relative. It's somebody she can trust and really, associate with there and not have to worry about, outside sources or people trying to re-influence her or anything like that. So it again, it goes unsaid. When you think about in those initial days of her joining that rebellion, it's going to very much like Clea, Vel is kind of that centerpiece for all of them, really, to kind of get reacquainted and refamiliarize with what the new day is going to look like going forward. So
Yeah, I really like that actually, Albert. The Mon Mothma aspect of it. I mean, again, leveraging that relationship we see earlier in the season, and then it comes back around to where Mon Mothma has that confidence to make a confidant out of her and to, like you said, use her as that grounding of kind of testing how she feels about things and testing this new way of living and this new way of working in many ways and of driving this, the needs of the rebellion forward, and having someone there who's kind of not really in the mix of it from a leadership standpoint, or even really, we don't really know what she's doing specifically, but
yeah,
just that Mon Mothma's got that relationship there, even though we would have assumed that to be more like a Bail Organa character. But I think coming back to family and relying on family, you can always kind of come back to it, and you always kind of find your way, even when you have difficult times and things aren't working out so well. You can still come back together, and there's a certain connection and a certain bond in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases. And with these two characters, you always felt that, even though there was tension, and for them to be able to kind of come back and figure that out and really connect over that, I think was really nice to see. And again, makes us curious for where Val goes with some of this. I mean, we thought this with Clea too. Like, what is next for these two characters that have a lot to contribute, but where do they want to contribute? How do they want to contribute? I think those are some of the things that we didn't really get a lot of great clarity around for going forward. That would have been nice to know, or nice to kind of have kind of like an epilogue type of thing about where, what they did in the end of the, at the end of the day. And this is kind of ripe for books and comics and things like that too, that they could kind of continue on or wrap up some of these arcs to kind of tie up some loose ends if they really wanted to, or even take them on new adventures and where they go throughout the actual open rebellion, if you will.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, we need to move on.
We need to talk about the Empire.
Yeah. We need to talk about the Empire. I thought this was going to be the short conversation. But there's, there's Brasso that's out there. Didn't really see a lot from them. Cinta just kind of died, and so we didn't really get a lot from her. It would have been nice at some point. Maybe we can come back and talk about like the Rylands group and just the Gorman front, right? Because I mean, that was at least a spotlight on a very specific cell, and we got to see everything from why they were. I mean, they become front and center here in just a second. So but
and I think Lonnie was another interesting one.
Yeah,
whether you equate him with Empire or maybe with with Rebellion. Clearly, he was on the side of the Rebellion, even though he's embedded. But I think Lonnie's another interesting character. Like, what does it mean to be the insider and have your doubts and push against your your leader in Luthen, and then of course ultimately kind of be betrayed by it too. And we talked extensively about that with Luthen and Clea as well, of how, and then when we did the episode breakdown too, it's really hard to see that, but you almost kind of understand it to an extent, even though we don't like it, right? We don't want that to be the case with our heroes, even if they're kind of anti-heroes in some way. But Lonnie was, taking substantial risk, for something that he truly believed in. But again, we didn't really get a lot of insight. I think to your point, we didn't get a lot of insight about what was motivating him in some of that, aside from he sees the tyranny, and maybe with his family, he sees some of that too. But,
yeah.
But what were the drivers for some of that? I don't know. I don't remember. At least in season 2, we didn't get a lot of that. He was just more bringing the information forward.
Yeah, I always equated his participation as just simply safety for his family at the end of the day.
Okay.
And I feel like he is a character that, in one life, he has absolute control of everything. And then the minute Luthen shows up, he has no control. And that's got to just feel hopeless at times, and certainly worrisome and stressful and all that, because at any moment he knows he could be expendable. And that ultimately that's what happened to him. His life was taken because he became a risk. And kind of sucks for him. But maybe at some point we can kind of revisit that maybe as a larger topic. But let's talk about the Empire.
Yeah, what'd you learn about the Empire that we didn't maybe know before?
I mean, nothing. It was shallow.
You found more interesting.
Yeah, shallow. Absolutely shallow throughout. No, there's a lot to say here, and I'm going to have to cut this down, to be honest. But
30 seconds. Go for it.
Yeah, right. I've never said anything in 30 seconds or less.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Empire. This show gave me everything that I ever wanted to know about the Empire. Again, things that we suspected, things that had been written about that weren't official. We got to see them. And I think what hits the hardest is that there was an aspect of the Empire, the human evilness of the Empire was finally on display, right? It wasn't a supernatural force power in the dark side. It wasn't an emperor shooting lightning bolts from his hands, or the Death Star blowing up planets. We got to see evil coming from everyday humans, right? And that was stemming from the authoritarianism and the fascism and all the isms that are associated with the empire. We got to see all of that. We got to see how quickly people can, decline from humanity and from their moral compasses, and do some really horrible things and relish in it. And, it just becomes infectious. And a lot of this is, of course, parallels to our own history and some of the empires that have ruled in the past. And so it was really, I'm going to say, comforting is not the word, because it's not comforting, but it was familiar, right? It was familiar in that sense that, okay, yeah, I kind of see where this is going. In fact, at one point while the show was airing, we were getting something that was very similar. I mean, it was like a carbon copy of what was happening in the real world, where, it felt like things were just being escalated to escalate. But that level of darkness, the level of evilness that came from the Empire, it finally gave them like the characteristics that we knew them to be, or knew them to have, and just seeing it firsthand. I mean, think about the stormtroopers, right? You brought this up, and I want to give you credit for it, because I kind of glossed over it when it came out. But you had said that this was the first time the stormtroopers actually felt scary. I mean, they looked cold. They looked like instruments of just death, even though we know they can't really hit anything with their blasters, but they were so lifeless,
Right.
And for the first time, you look at them and you're like, whoa, those guys are kind of menacing, and really changed my perspective on the Empire just from that perspective alone. But yeah, I mean, I've got a lot more to say here. Let me go through my notes real quick. Why don't you kind of chime in? I'm trying to make what I've got of what I've got. So
yeah, I think my takeaway is probably just more of the same of yours, but maybe in a slightly different perspective, or maybe a little different level of detail. It was, I think a lot of what we're going to circle around is around Gorman, right? And I think it was those first instances where they show the video and they kind of show the life of the Gorman, of the Gore, and what they are. And then you have the Empire just with the propaganda machine in the room. Like, how do we do this to basically spin this whole thing so that we can infiltrate? But at the end of the day, it comes down to that they are totally okay with destroying this planet with the people still on it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they all kind of try to find work, they're all kind of working around it and doing it to where you're like, okay, these people, I'm almost getting a feel like some of these people aren't horrible human beings. They're not horrible people in some way, but then they all still capitulate and go along with it. So they are, right? Or they feel so compelled because they know the consequences, whatever it might be. That was something that we had not really seen as front and center, because usually when we have this moment of conflict within the Empire, we have like an Agent Callus who ends up defecting, or they see the error of their ways and they want to join the rebellion, and they have some moment, even if it's at the very end, where they see the light and then they die or whatever. But I think here we see people doubling down on the behaviors. And when we talk about like Partagaz in here in a minute, I mean, it's one of those characters, if you wonder what went through his head at the very end, like, I chose poorly, to quote the knight. And so it's just that unflinching cruelty of the Empire coming into, and like you said, it's just on full display in this series. And it's something that we knew about. It wasn't surprising, but to finally see it so well articulated, and then we have people standing by that seem like they know better and seem like they feel differently, and you see the reservation, and yet they stay silent and they move forward, right? And then they laugh about it a little bit later on when they get comfortable with it, because there's benefit for them at the end of the day. But it wasn't the constant power grabbing and stuff that we're used to seeing with the Moffs and stuff like that. It was a very different level of cynicism, or not cynicism, but I don't know, just like you had said, evil, I think, right? And just a different flavor and variation of it, but it just feels so wrong in many ways, right? And the series just did a great job of doing that. And that was something, again, not new with the Empire, but it was something that just finally came through very clearly and articulated way in this series.
Yeah. Some of the other things that I actually had quoted Martha's in here about the Empire is a disease that thrives in darkness. It is never more alive than when we sleep. We got to see that firsthand from a lot of these things. I want to say also too, this is kind of a joke and a half a joke, but I may have mentioned this on the show when we did the breakdown, but growing up, it was always funny to say, "Oh, the Empire never did anything wrong." Right? They were they were attacked by some rebels. They were terrorists. The Empire was never wrong. You can't say that anymore. Like nobody can. That argument does not hold up. And I know it's a meme, and I know it's all in good fun, but this was finally again the face of evil was given to the Empire in a way that suddenly hit all of us for very personal reasons, or at least in very real reasons. We got to see when you look at fascism. You look at some of the characteristic traits of fascism or authoritarianism or ultraism, any of those isms. There are a lot of them are very similar. A lot of them are common, feed into each other. But we got to see some of that stuff here, like militarism, right? The inciting of violence that happened on Gorman. He called it a declaration of martial domain. That was the word choice that Partagaz used, right? We got to see
it's a lot of word salad in some of this stuff too,
yeah,
right?
No, well, that's Tony Gilroy right there. Yeah. But and then you look at, you were talking about like just how evil and how people double down. There was nobody better, honestly, than the small character of Captain Kaido, right? Who was the quote crisis specialist and was told, when they told Dedra to just step aside, you're running the operation, but you got to let him do what he needs to do, because no one's going to like it, because that's just what he is. I mean, this guy's pure evil. And he absolutely was. I mean, he was relishing in what was happening. He knew exactly. I mean, he put all the pieces in place for it to happen, because that's just how far he had fallen and how much, he was getting rewarded for his evil deeds by the Empire and by the Empire and the Emperor himself, probably.
Yeah, and we should highlight Hardcounter's comment here too. So he says, I think to Albert's point, Cyril's entire story arc is a statement about how certain isms can lure the insecure. I think it's a fantastic comment. I mean, this is something we talked about with the Cyril and Dedra conversation as well. Of he was just ripe for it. You have someone who is constantly looking for some sort of recognition, some sort of purpose, meaningfulness, is passionate about what his belief system is, and he thinks he's finally found it, only to be completely, abandoned in that by the people, one person he thought he was truly caring about, and then in an organization that he thought that he could truly believe in, only to be completely duped at the end of the day and taken advantage of in that way. And so he had followed up with, he's not necessarily a villain in the traditional sense, but you kind of understand that, right? And you feel bad. And I think we'd even use some words like you almost feel like it's a little pathetic in some ways, because you see just how vacant he is when even Cassian Andor doesn't know who he is. And he just has this moment of like, I just don't matter. My entire life has been a fraud. And the Empire just uses and abuses you. And they have people like Dedra, like Partagaz, like Krennic, like all of these people top to bottom, that this is what they do. And I think Cyril is such a great example of someone who is just kind of taken advantage of to an extent. I mean, there was some of that already in Cyril of what he wanted to do, but you could see how they abused that in many ways too, of people who maybe not necessarily bad people, but are used as pawns to do a lot of bad things.
Yeah. I mean, and Dedra was right behind it. I mean, she was the one that was pulling all the strings on him. I mean,
she's
when when he finally stood up to her and was like, what's going on? Why am I not in the loop? Why is all this happening? Rather than trying to give him an answer, she just kisses him, gives him that awkward kiss.
Shuts him up,
Shuts him up and tells him to head back or whatever, and just walks away. Like, I don't know what else to do. I'm going to distract you with this kiss because it's so foreign to both of us, So, yeah, I mean, I definitely see him as a victim. I mean, he had his own personal gains in there, but it was very clear that his whole world and his whole construct of a life came crumbling down there. And we talked about that during the Cyril Karn breakdown. But
right.
The other some of the other things was just how the propaganda machine was interesting. What they did to the Gormans to kind of build them up and make them. They played the long game. And there was at the very beginning of this season, they were talking about, well, we're going to look at alternatives. And if we can't find the alternatives, and we're going to execute this plan. After watching that a few times, like, I don't think that was ever the case. I think they just needed time to kind of build up that narrative that these were terrible people and, self-indulging people and egotistical people, or whatever it was they were trying to tout. They needed that time to kind of build up that propaganda so they could execute this plan. Because Krennic, when he comes in and says, hey, you know what? He doesn't seem very sincere now when he delivers that line of, hey, we tried, but we're not finding things. So, oh man, it looks like we're just going to have to go ahead and, do what we said we might have to do to Gorman.
Yeah, director, we just talked about this 24 hours ago. What's the rush?
Yeah,
Give me a chance to play it out.
Yeah. But
I mean, and you kind of see that, right? You almost feel like some of the people in the room may feel like they're kind of duped as well, but you're right. None of it was sincere whatsoever about what they were going to do on Gorman. They always knew what they would likely end up doing, and they just did it under the pretense of all of it. But I think it's also it's an interesting debate around the evolution of the empire, because even from the original trilogy days of saying the emperor has dissolved the Senate, right? But then they've outlived their purpose effectively, but we see them still trying to kind of effectively use the Senate or abuse the Senate to kind of create laws and scenarios and situations to be able to do it, except you have this constant conflict with certain senators as well. So it's interesting to kind of watch the boldness of the empire continue to come to the forefront and escalate, whereas they were a little more cautious and careful about that by trying to lean into the propaganda machine, even though some people saw right through it.
Mm-hmm.
But you see kind of that evolution and that progression of the empire moving towards where they just don't give a what, and then the imperial monster kind of comes for you all when he just kind of had enough, and they've got to scale of what they think they need. They find their tipping point, right, to kind of counterpoint to the rebellion aspect we were talking about earlier. They have their moment where they think we are unstoppable with our super weapon and where we're at with things. There's no way anybody can stand against us now. Fear will be the ultimate tool. Right?
Yeah, I mean, the level of control had to have been exponential, right? It started off small and continued to grow as more and more, planets and systems started to succumb to the control.
Right.
And with that came the higher levels of authoritarianism, the power that they were feeling, and so they started abolishing things, and they didn't care as much as anymore, right? They weren't worried about what people's feelings or what high-powered people were going to say, because they all had them in their pocketbooks already. So all of that absolutely makes sense. It's interesting too that they did kind of masquerade as kind of like the group of law and order, right? Everything was because, and this is all like, if you go look what fascist dictatorships have done in the past or Nazi dictatorships have done in the past, it is all like by a script, and you can point to exact examples that we saw from this series in particular, but then just overall in the length of the empire. But we even had I can't say the word because I don't want YouTube to flag the video, but we had SA, the assault that happened on Bix. Right. Seeing that happen, that was very real for a lot of people. I know there was a lot of debate when that happened, offline about would the empire really even do this and how would they allow this to happen? And yeah, man, that's exactly what happens. I mean, that was one time, that was one instance, but that was probably rampant. And again, it is another characteristic of what happens, unfortunately, especially with like colonialism or colonizationism, right? Where people are coming in and they're eradicating cultures. We saw it with what was the culture in season 1, the Aldanis,
yeah.
Right? Wiping them out. They wipe out the Gormans here. They wipe out anybody that stands in their way, or if there's something to gain from them, they go through that. That's another aspect of that kind of a government. We saw, we saw the economic control. We saw corruption there. There's a lot of cronyism that was happening. We saw, to feed into the terrorism stuff too, or the torturing. With Dr. what's his name? Gorst.
Yeah, Gorst.
Not only did they just kind of, put their toe in the water, but then at the very end, they're like, hey, the Emperor loved this. You guys are rock stars. We're going to blow this up into a full-fledged program now. Like, this is great, right?
We want everybody seeing Ewoks by the time we're done with this program. Yeah.
I mean, it was, they realized that it was effective, and there were probably a lot more people that they could do this to get whatever they needed. And so they didn't have to tippy toe around asking or negotiating or threatening. It was just like, no, let's just start torturing people. And because this has been very successful for us, that's kind of scary to think about.
That's where the counterpoint of like Reign of the Empire, where they were kind of secluding senators and doing a little bit on the side to where the senators were afraid to speak out. And, still very direct in a way, but also a little still covert. And then you're right. Then we just start leaning really hard into some of these things to where we don't even mask it anymore. Or we mask it a little bit, but we all know what the imperial methods are going to be. And then they just keep leaning into them.
And I've got more, and I'm not going to go through them all. As I was laying these out, I'm like, I started thinking to myself, I wrote a question: do they have any limits at this point? Right? Is there anything that you can think that the Empire wouldn't do at this point?
Realistically, no. But I think in the public domain, I think yes. Although as each year that goes by, that answer becomes more no, right?
Right. I
Like
mean, they blew up
they
a
will
planet,
do,
and by the time we get to episode 4,
right? Yeah. So we
Whole-
clearly all, all restrictions are off by that
Right.
point. And you see you see that decline there of how that works. But I think, no, all things are on the table for them to do it, but just how overt are they going to be about it is what shifts over time. And we see that, we've seen that in, oh gosh, we've seen this in Rebels. We've seen this. We started to see aspects of it even in Clone Wars a little bit, and in some of the material that's come in a post Order 66 world around the tightening of security, the idea of chain codes and restricting of freedoms, and what happens if you disobey. We see them chipping away over time until it just escalates, and we know they're doing far worse things. We allude to it a lot of other content. Now we finally see it front and center in season 1 and 2 here. Yeah.
And so the last thing I'll say, we can get into like some of the character spotlights here. We only got 3 because but the last thing I'll say, and this is to call back to what I was saying earlier, the weight of all of these acts and the horrific events that we saw and witnessed really change the blowing up of the Death Star. Like when that Death Star blows up, you suddenly, me personally, I can't speak to everybody. Maybe I'm being dramatic, but it's a different kind of emotion now because you know exactly what people have been through, right? We got to experience that firsthand through this series. Same thing when we get to the end of Return of the Jedi, when everybody's celebrating, there's a great cause for celebration. On the surface, from the movies, it was always because, there was an evil space wizard and the dark side was around and they blew up a couple planets. But all these personal lives that were impacted and changed, we finally get to see all of that. And so that the payoff for those celebrations and what those people feel gets exemplified, in what we feel, right? And it's a totally different experience now. I went back and just watched the celebration and how joyous it was. And, and just on Andor season 1 and 2 alone, I mean, there's a reason to celebrate for that. And it really plays into, again, with especially Rogue One, 2, and, just how much those people sacrifice for everything that we just witnessed, right? But it just puts it at a very personable level that we've never had before in Star Wars. And so it's a very good thing because it certainly makes it much more dramatic when we get to those moments.
That's the exact word I was going to use. It became personal for us. Like, yeah, we understand blowing up Alderaan is significant, but we didn't have a lot of context about what the importance was. Of course, back in 1977, we certainly didn't have any.
Right.
But even today, I mean, you see it from a distance. There's always this removal from it. Yeah, we know key characters like Princess Leia. We know what happened with Bail Organa. We see the effect of it on Obi-Wan, but we don't have a way to make it personal. That situation, there were chips at it, there were nicks at it the entire for 15 years, 20 years prior to that. Mm-hmm. As well as escalating things with situations like the Gorman. It wasn't just the Gorman massacre. It was the complete annihilation of the planet at the end of the day.
Yep.
So it's these atrocities that we have, and we finally see them in a more personal way in this series, that we can get to know the people a little bit better, and we see the culture, we see the pride, we see the familial aspects of it, and then we see our heroes, chipping in some way to try to help and try to prevent it, and not always in the best ways, but we see the desperation come through. We just feel all of that. We get all those feels from it now, and it just makes, I agree with you, I think it makes all of those moments later on, even all the way to Return of the Jedi, just more powerful, right? I mean, if we truly have achieved something that when you watch the series 5 years prior was no chance in hell this was ever going to happen. There's just no way, and no one believed in it. But yet somehow we've come to it, and it was these events that burn brightly, in Luthen's words, like Gorman, that are unfortunate, or I hate to say unfortunate, it seems belittling it, but these tragic events that are the ones. These are the catalysts that actually initiate the change and actually show the galaxy, look, this is going to happen to everyone. Mm-hmm. And then you have people like Mon Mothma willing to speak up, right?
Yep.
In order to make a difference in the galaxy. But yeah, it certainly, I think personal is the right word, though. I think you hit around the head.
All right, well, let's get into just quickly on some of these the characters. And again, there weren't a whole lot to talk about from the Empire side, because as much as we got to see the atrocities, this really wasn't a, hey, let's get in the heads of, the Empire. But at the end, we can kind of infer some things about what they went through and how they were changed. But let's talk about Krennic first, because he was the big bad, I guess, for the most part in this series, especially during season 2. I mean, he started off in season 1 kind of normal, like not. He didn't seem like a tyrannical person or an evil person. He just seemed like he was a jerk more than anything that was working for the Empire. And then by the time we get to season 2, and everything that he was saying, everything, of course, all in on the Gorman massacre. And by the time we get to like see that last year or two, he definitely is kind of like the really changed person that we see when we get to Rogue One. And we know all the backstory now too with him and Thrawn and vying for Dad's love and interest and attention, right? Some of that was playing into it. But yeah, I mean, it was Bill Mendelsohn, or was it Ben Mendelsohn? Yeah. Did an incredible job during Rogue One. He certainly picked it up here. But what do you want to add as far as his character development or things that stood out for you?
I think what we get with Rogue One was more, and even with the competition with Thrawn, was more self-centeredness. And I think here we start to see a little bit of protectionism within him, but I think also we get this idea of like truly how kind of evil of a person he is, and only his own agenda, but also appealing to the Emperor. And again, a lot of that's for vanity and for his own motivational purposes and for his own progression. But I think it just kind of doubled down. It peeled back another layer on that onion. We didn't get too far into it with Krennic, but you start to see that appreciation. You also get a feel for that pressure that he's under too. We get a lot of that in Rogue One, of course. We've seen that a little bit with the competing programs with Thrawn, but I think we also see it with the way that the ISB performs. And Krennic's, I don't want to call it maybe oversight of that, but his perceptions and his perceived failure of that organization and how it continues to put him at risk, and how delicate the Death Star program is, or Project Stardust, right? Again, a different angle of something we already knew, but just slightly different shift of how we perceive it. And so I thought those were nice elements to do it without having to dive super far into to Krennic. But also, he's a snake. I mean, and to your point, you don't believe a single word he says on Gorman when we're first introduced of, how do we address the Gorman problem without casualties effectively, right? How do we convince them to do the thing that we want them to do when he knows he gives zero, what's about any of that? It's more of, all right, how do I appease the situation? Because this is where we're at in time. And then I'm going to get the materials that we need. I'm going to get the resources that we require, no matter how we do it. Yeah. But like, I think you put it perfectly. It sounded like it was more buying time, but he's a snake. You can't believe anything he says. And I think what I like about Ben Mendelsohn's representation of that is it's always this condescension that goes with every time he says something. Like you said, he's just a condescending jerk about all of it. But to where you always like question about like, how is he really sincere about it, or what else is turning there? I think that's one of the fascinating parts about Krennic in some way. Maybe not super fascinating, but some aspect of that,
for sure.
How he's able to kind of find that right tweak and that balance of twisting these situations to his thing, or to his kind of own designs.
Yeah, I mean, he does a lot with not that much screen time, to be honest. I mean, you think about, he's only pops up in a few episodes, but his presence, I mean, he definitely controls the room, and I mean that as a character and as an actor. But yeah, you get to definitely feel his power being exerted, and you understand. By the time you get to that last year prior to, you kind of understand why he is who he is. By the time we get to Rogue One, again, a victim of all of this stuff, and we say all this stuff, and you got to think the Emperor is just sitting there, enjoying it, relishing it, drawing from the power, the dark side of it all. But
I think one interesting aspect of Krennic, and maybe leading into Partagaz, was their last discussion of them telling each other good luck, and they know they're probably not going to see each other again, and this is not going well.
Yeah.
But it did give you some question about, I kind of want to see where these two have been a little bit. And I'm not usually one of those people that gets too into all of the backstory stuff, but these two, they were really dynamic on screen together, with the Anton Lesser and Ben Mendelsohn, and then the characterizations of them that they had. They really brought forth that there's a lot of history there. And you'd almost like to know a little bit what it is, because Partagaz is another one of those characters that he seems like he's just purely, he believes in everything the Empire is doing, Doesn't matter the cruelty, they'll get the job done, so on and so forth. And then as the season progresses towards the last one, you start to feel like there's a lot of regret where he's unsure, especially when he's listening to the manifesto from what was the name?
Nimic.
Yeah, Nimic's manifesto. Yeah. So when he starts to listen to that, you're like, man, what is going through his head to where, what is it that you truly believe now? And maybe it's only at the end you have that clarity and there's no absolution for you, right? But at the same time, just what is going through his head? And the Imperial characters have to be cold to an extent, right? We can't get too far into it because that's just that's how the Empire is. But at the same time, you would really like to have a from a certain point of view story about his last moments in some way to figure out like what is it that he's actually going through in these final days.
I just thought about that. What if they did like a from a certain point of view book on Andor? Because
that would be wild.
They could fill in the blanks on those years,
Oh man, those books are already like this thick, and they would probably be twice that.
Yeah.
You could write a lot of stories. I bet you some people would be champing at the bit for that too.
I was trying to think like who my favorite, and I hate to use the word favorite, but who my favorite Imperial character was in Andor, and it's got to be Dedra Miro. Honestly, like I don't even. It's probably not even a close second. But if I had to pick somebody as a close second, it's probably Leo Partagas because he seems like a character, and again, this is just my perception and my take on the character. I always got the sense that he knew he was of a dying breed, right?
Yeah.
He could see the writing on the wall. He saw it years ago, maybe, in that as the Empire suddenly started to have more and more control, that they no longer needed these like groups like the ISB. Like, why? Just send the military in, right? Just take over. Have it, you don't need all the cloak and dagger stuff. Just kill people if they need to be killed and take what we need to take. And you eliminate those jobs. You eliminate that head overhead and all that. And so I feel like he's probably seen that writing on the wall. And I think that's why when they have that moment that you were talking about, when him and Krennic is like, I can't save you anymore. Like, this is just a foregone conclusion. And we both know it. It was hey, nice. I can't wait to see you again, even though they both know they were never going to see each other again. And I think that's why at the very end, he decides to he's having that moment of self-reflection of like, wow, it's probably amazing that I've been able to stick around this long. But I've never really even thought about like what it is, what all this means and how exposed we really were until he starts listening to that manifesto. He probably listened to that many, many times too. There's probably a story there where he was always listening to it and that was always in the back of his mind. And what he was worried about, that everything that was being predicted there, everything that was being spoken about was the actual truth. And it was his job just to kind of keep up the facade and make sure that people didn't believe in any of that, knowing that it was all going to come crumbling down at some point. So it is in that way, in that sense, he is kind of a sad character, and I do sympathize with him only to the extent of like, hey, I can understand somebody who feels like, they're a dinosaur and their time is coming. For me, in my real world, that's just like a job, like a particular sector of technology that's suddenly going away or whatever. Not, oh, my life is going to be gone or their lives are going to be gone soon. So it was, he's kind of an interesting character and certainly sad. And I can certainly sympathize with some of that stuff. I don't know that he ever necessarily regretted any of the things that he did. Like, I think he probably just succumbed to, hey, that's just the way life is, right? Mm-hmm. There's winners and losers, and we have a lot of winners here. And unfortunately, people are going to have to die and things are going to have to go horribly wrong. Like, Gorman or whoever else they've oppressed, because, I've got a job to do and I don't want to be the last person. I don't want to be the one that's left on the hook here when things don't go right, because I know, my time is limited. So I think he was fine. So
when Partagas asks the question when he's listening to the manifesto, like, who do you think it is? I mean, it was probably that question that made me, start to question some other things too. I mean, because all of a sudden Partagas is humanizing the enemy.
Right.
And he's trying to understand them maybe. And maybe it's this clarity that you have when your time is up. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, we seem to want that, and sometimes we get that if something snap into focus and then regret sets in. But it was that question though, that like, is he trying to humanize, or is he just waxing at that point of everything is lost, this is the end, and now I'm just I'm taken aback at how we got to this place. How did you kind of interpret that question? And is there anything in deeper in there? Maybe it sounds like maybe no, but what were your take on that scene specifically?
I have a heart and head answer to this one, and my head says he was asking that question from the stance of like, why does this like
who are these people?
Like, who are these people? Like, how can they even think this way? How can they even care so much and have this much influence? And then my heart tells me that, it was more humanistic, or, there was more humanity there, in the sense of that he was thinking about that person and what they probably been through.
Well, what they were saying, and
or what they were saying,
how real and true
right
it all was. And he finally had that, there's a term for it, but that clarity that you have.
Yeah. But that, I can see it both ways. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to see if we could ever get like an actual, definition or some clarity around exactly what the intent was there on that line.
Yeah. If you're listening, Lucasfilm Publishing, you have our permission to continue. Thank you.
Yeah. Please let us know how that goes.
Yeah.
Overall, Anton Lesser was great, though. I had never really seen anything in with him in it, but he was outstanding through all of this.
He was a good character.
Good actor.
Good actor. Yeah.
The only other character I have on, and this is probably a short conversation, but it was definitely one
guy.
definitely somebody from the Empire that I felt like went through a pretty big change, and that was Hirt. We didn't get a name other than that, but this was in season 1. He was Dedra's assistant, and then by the time we got to season 2, he'd been promoted, and he had taken over the Axis program, and was suddenly competition with her, and we had those exchanges there where at times I felt like, I don't know, he did seem kind of like a snake, and like maybe was using her, but that's just kind of what the Empire did, right? They just used each other to kind of climb up the old, professional ladder, until Vader came, and then nobody wanted to get that high because you die. But
true.
But yeah, I kind of saw him just doing whatever he needed to do to get to accumulate wealth and power in that system. So on one hand, it did feel like that was who he was, and then when he was talking to Lonnie at times, it did seem like he was genuinely trying to do what was right. Like he had that whole conversation with her about, look, I'm not in this for the glory, right? Like you are. I mean, she had a reputation at that point for doing things to get the glory, to get the attention. We saw that to be the actual case, especially, toward the very end there, and how she kind of handled Luthen. But it did feel like he was kind of a sincere person, almost somebody that would be kind of like a Cyril Karn if he would have been in that position, trying to do what's right, or at least work within the confines of the structure that was created. But nonetheless, I still have him as kind of a weasel and a snake, because he had an opportunity there to kind of help Dedra, especially after she kind of gave him all the information, those last pieces of information that he needed in order to kind of track down Cassian and all that. And he decided to, he didn't fight for her. He just kind of left her in there, let her rot. And that was probably the best place, because maybe he was in it for the glory. Maybe at that point, he was very sincere and honest, but at that point it was like, okay, now that she's out of the way, I've got a clear shot of moving up even further. And so the better and longer she stays, locked up and away from, all the stuff that I'm doing, the better my success and career is going to be.
Yeah, this is one of those characters that you start off like, okay, maybe they make you question, like, hey, are there not so bad people in the Empire that just truly believe in order in a post-war, post-Clone War era, where they really do believe in what it can represent, right? It's the idea of the Empire isn't so bad as maybe the reality, and they overlook some of it. Because you're right, in season 1, he was kind of a good gopher, but the moments with Lonnie, like there always felt like there was something there. There was something genuine. Start of second season was a little bit like that too, but then we start to see that power corrupt him pretty severely, to the point where you see the arrogance coming through constantly, and you see him empowered by it whenever he's able to take Dedra down, and you just feel like all of a sudden then he sold his soul at that point. Like it's all downhill from there. And then like the ego and everything of what Dedra does, he somewhat repeats her mistake to an extent. He had a bit of an assault team, of course, but he got what was coming to him because they continue to underestimate. But this was a character that you almost like feel like it hurts to see it, because you're like, why? you didn't look like you were all that bad, but now you're the worst and you're a complete tool and I hate you. Like,
Yeah.
like I don't like your character whatsoever, like in the best kind of way. And so I think here fits that bill really well of even the people low on the totem pole who maybe have more genuine aspirations, or genuine of why they're there to contribute at some point. Absolute power corrupts absolutely kind of idea, right? And you get to that thing, that power, and you feel like you finally got something. You don't want to lose it. And he's just constantly consuming, and he's up that ladder and climbing it. It's the traditional Moff thing, the Moff infighting that we've seen.
Yeah.
Here it is like one of the most pure examples I think that we have of this. Once you get to a certain point, you see that takeover, and that just epitomizes the Empire and the imperial like structure of how they do this, and how they, quite honestly, this is how Vader encourages this type of behavior too, right? And it's almost the Sith mentality of one to have the power, another to crave it, but then again, it really kind of erodes the system into an extent as well, because you're not in where the Sith are trying to kind of consolidate power and make sure that you only have the strongest survive. The Empire is just constantly infighting and not going to that end whatsoever.
Yeah, at some point we still need to come back and do a deeper dive. We did a Rule of Two show, but it would be fun to kind of get into that. I know we've been talking about that forever, but it would be fun to talk about the pros and cons there. But I like that. I like the fact that you said that, though, because we see that being mimicked in the rank society or rank structure of the Empire. Yeah. But this guy, I mean, he had like arguably one of the most fulfilling send-offs, right? Sure. So I did.
Oh yeah, it was very satisfying watching him get used as a human shield,
right? Yeah. So can't complain too much. So he got what was coming to him in the end. But all right. So final question. I guess, is there anything left that you would want that is left to be told with the Empire? Or
the question is, do we even know what else we want to know about this?
I think on either side, like it feels like we have a pretty good grasp. I mean, the Empire. There's so many more levels.
The answer is probably always yes.
Yeah,
there's always more to whether we want it or not. It's probably going to vary quite a bit from person to person. Let us know what y'all think in the chat, of course, too. But I think, whether we like it or not, yes, we're going to get more. We know we're going to get Master of Evil from Adam Christopher, so we're going to get a different flavor, different element there. And
so we're going more books coming from what's his name over there?
From Alexander Freed from Reign of the Empire. Yeah, so we know we're going to get more in this era. So whether you want it or not is kind of irrelevant at this point. You're going to get it. But I think there are probably still interesting nuances that we would fill, and I think it, from an organizational standpoint, I think that's probably less interesting. And I think what we learned with Andor is that it really comes down to the more humanizing elements. So how do we localize this, and how do we understand the internal debates and the conflicts that we have within each of the organizations of how they're managing it and how they're trying to rebuff one another? I think that's where the continued interesting and the tug of war continues. And I think that's what makes this era still so compelling in the midst of all of these other larger than life characters that we've got as well, right? With Darth Vader and everybody else. So,
yeah. And I agree. Like we are definitely going to get more of it. There are probably other, like you said, other facets of the Empire that I'm probably most interested in, but there's still a lot to understand about the rebellion. I mean, like we talked about on the show, just seeing Yavin and getting that behind the scenes tour of what was going on and what things were looking like, that's super intriguing and super interesting for me. So I wouldn't hate it if they did, but it just feels like at this point, I feel like we got a really good, like there's probably no more surprises from either side, but there's definitely more content there and a more contextualization of how they're set up and how they're run that would be interesting to see. And I'm assuming we'll get more of that in some of the media that we just talked about. So I'm looking forward to it.
Without a doubt. You know who I look forward to seeing every single week we're on our live stream hour?
The people in our live stream.
The people in our live stream, yeah. So we had a great turnout tonight. Thank you for everyone who came out and said hello. Thank you for your comments as well. It was a good time. Thanks to Skywalker's Academy, Stephanie, Music Train, Alex, Zeralens, One Up versus CPU, My Star Wars Guys, Qui-Gon Jay, good to see you. Hard Counter, thanks for coming out as well. If I missed anybody who's not intentional, our sincerest thanks. We certainly appreciate that. If you're listening to this on the podcast, cantitacast.com/YouTube. Make sure you ring the notification bell so that you are notified when we go live, and you too can join us. Again, we'll going to be targeting Tuesday nights for the public feed at 9 p.m. Central. rather than Wednesday. So we would love if you guys came out and paid us a visit, say hello, get your name up on the screen.
Hello there.
All of the good stuff. Yeah. Hello there.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining us on the live stream. And don't forget, go check out Jedi Novel Archive. Lauren's got the latest review of Sanctuary by Lamar Giles. That's the Bad Batch novel that just came out. Got a really good like texture on the cover, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it's actually a really good book. So
Albert and his ASMR. Go check Patreon if you're curious more about that one.
I just like the way it feels. I don't like the way it sounds, but I like the way it feels. Whatever that is.
It's sensory, right? So.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Well, I think ASMR is audible, but yeah, whatever. But sensory, it's
sensory
okay.
person.
We're good. This is getting weird. Let's end the show.
Yeah, no, let's end the show. It's never not been weird, but no, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you guys here on the next show.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.